Hello and welcome to another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. My name is Mike Bombard and I'm a principal cloud architect here at CloudBolt. And in today's video, we're going to be covering how do I use advanced parameter dependencies in CloudBolt. So the whole big idea here is going to talk through our primary features for changing a couple of the behaviors of parameter fields inside of the CloudBolt system. The regenerate options capability. This is really the ability of CloudBolt to dynamically generate different options based off of the values found in another field or fields inside of the user interface that your users are interacting with. So we're going to walk through 3 use cases there for a single controlling field, multiple choice fields where you have one field that could have multiple values. And based off of each of those values, we might choose to add different options to the list. And then finally, the multiple controlling fields where you have 2 or more fields that all control what values are available in this one parameter field that we're trying to control the options for. Let's go ahead and get started. For this video, we're going to roughly be following the documentation. So if you open your CloudBolt docs, you can go to parameters under CloudBolt reference and then parameter options. And if we scroll down towards the bottom, most of the video is going to be focused on this regenerate options parameter dependencies. And even more so there's a lot of good information up there, but really we're going to be following these 3 examples here. Probably do something a little bit different, but the substance is really what we're getting at, where we still have the get options list function or insertion point for our generated options plugin. What we're going to do a little differently than a normal one is pass in a control value. We'll then set a dependency on the fields. We'll get there. And then based on the value passed in, it's going to show a different list of options for the field we're working with. The second use case, this is when you have a controlling field with allow multiple sets. So in this case, we have a list of plants where, if they select trees, we'll add these options to it. If they select shrubs, we'll add these options to the list that's returned back. So just a different example. And then multiple controlling fields would be multiple different controlling fields where we have a control value dict. So actually a dictionary entry that's passed in instead of the control values list that we see here. So just a little bit of differentiation between the 3 different use cases. I don't know that I'm going to grab this from here quite yet. Let's get everything set up to start. So let's take a use case and just kind of build this out on the fly. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna steal this whole sample. So I'm going to copy code. I am going to do it in PyCharm just because it helps me to keep things correct. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this single control. So this will be for our first use case. I'm going to go ahead and just paste everything from the example here. I don't know that I want to do species. I'll probably do... Let's do numbers. So I'm going to just have an original field that you can select 1, 2, or 3 from. In here, I'm going to say, and I'm going to make it a string. I'm not going to fuss with making it an integer and having to translate all of that. We don't need to do that. So basically, again, this get options list function is the insertion point for a regenerated options, actually for any generated parameter options plugin. The big difference here is that we're passing in this control value field now. We will set a control value field here in just a minute when we create our parameters. We haven't even done that yet. I am going to say, I'm going to make this very simple. I don't want to make it complex. But the options, and you can check some of the other parameter options videos where we've shown this before. I'm just going to give it a very basic list of strings to return. And then let's say, So based on me selecting 1, 2, or 3 with my controlling field, it'll show me ABC, DEF, or GHI. The return format here is actually shown in the docs as well. Let's just show that real quick because it is really helpful to see. And I don't know that it's in this doc, but if I come over to generated parameter options, let me remove my filter here. And if we do advanced return options, you'll see some of the advanced keys that we can return in the dictionary. I don't have to return a dictionary, but we allow it as part of an option that you may want to use in your environment. So let's go back over. Override true. We can leave that okay. That just means if there are other options existing when you change the value on the other field, we're going to override that value. So that should be fine. I could also let's also set a default here. Actually, I'm not going to set a default because then I need to put more logic in here. Let's leave it as is. Let's save all here. And then I'm going to go back over to my CloudBolt instance. I'm going to create a couple of parameters. So go to the parameters admin. New parameter. I'm going to call this my favorite number. I'm going to namespace this with GPO, like generated parameter options. That way I know what it's for. Favorite number. So this is going to be the number field. I'm going to say that this is going to be a string. I am going to make it required, and I'm going to create this. Then I'm going to add some static options for this field. So I can search for my namespace here and find anything that has GPO in there. Now I can go to my favorite number and just give it the 3 options that we want the user to be able to select from as a global option. So these are static. These will never change. So I have my 3 options selected. Then I can go back to all parameters, and I'm going to create the parameter that we're going to create a dependency for. I'm going to do new parameter. This is going to be my favorite letter. Can't type today. And I'm going to go ahead and do string. I'm going to make it required, and I'm going to create. All right, let's see. My favorite letter is not going to have any static options defined, but we are going to create a programmatically generated option plugin here. Notice this is just the out-of-the-box default one. I have mine stored in my ProServe directory, so I'm just going to update this to point at the script that we've been working with. And generated parameter option, single control, generate option, single control. All right, so we're going to fetch that file from the URL. So we should see our script here. Once it refreshes, there we go. So it's now pulling from my file system on my appliance. So we can see that it's pulling in that options list. So that's step 1, is setting and creating our generated options plugin. The next is we need to tell the system that this particular parameter is dependent on a different parameter. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a dependency. The dependency that I want, I'm going to delete this and I'm going to look for my namespace parameter again. So there's my favorite number. So we're going to make my favorite letter, the value is dependent on my favorite number. This is going to be a regenerate options dependency type. So don't forget that. If you don't select that, it's going to look for a show or hide dependency type. So regenerate options. I'm going to go ahead and create. Here we go. The next thing that we need to do, I'm going to add this to an environment. I could add it to a blueprint. There's a whole bunch of other places I could add parameters, but I am going to add this to an environment. And I'm just going to clone an existing environment for this specific use case. Take my VMware sales cluster. I'm going to clone the environment. Just so that I'm not changing the original one. And I am going to then come over. I have a whole bunch of things added in here that I'm already using for this environment. So I don't need to, I'll leave all of those. And I'm going to add in those two options that I had. So add in my GPO, so my favorite letter, my favorite number. I'm going to add those in. I'm not going to do anything else with them. But I am going to, let's just see. Okay, so I have a group that's available, that is capable of using this environment. And then I need to make sure, I would imagine my custom server blueprint is picking up that environment as an eligible environment. So just going to check that real quick. So my build tab is not, oh, so all capable means that this should work with that environment as well. So really all we're doing here is testing the UI. So if I go to my IT group, I should be able to select my VMware regenerate options environment. And what we should see now are two fields. We have my favorite number and my favorite letter. Notice my favorite letter using the default of 1, which it just takes the first item in the list. You can change the system behavior to override that. But when I use 1, it shows ABC. But when I change this to 2, it changes that to DEF. When I change this to 3, it's going to update my options to GHI. So you with this plugin, you can see that this is being dynamically generating those options for the dropdown here. The one thing to keep in mind is that this is a very rudimentary use case. A lot of times what we're doing is I'm selecting something here that drives an API call in this second field. So really what we did here, while it is very basic, what we would do is, make a different API call if it were a particular control value for 1 versus 2 versus 3. So because this uses Python, Python is very good at making REST API calls or building in whatever your logic is. Build your logic into this function, and that will show you how to control a single field. Our next example that we're going to walk through is going to be, I'm going to just kind of build on this. I have 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, D, E, F, those available here. I'm going to go through and one other thing I'll show for the single control method, it's kind of bonus, is one thing that I like to do here is I like to, if you recall, we saw in our dropdown where it was pre-selecting the first value in the list for the controlled field. I don't like that approach. I like to force the customer to explicitly select it. You can approach that however you want. But what you'll notice here is that I have a list of tuples. So tuples are just ordered lists in CloudBolt. But if I return a tuple, I'm able to return both a label on the right-hand side of the tuple and a value on the left-hand side. So in my instance, what we'll see now is instead of automatically selecting A, it's going to prompt me to select a value. And I can't submit this because the value is actually an empty value. So I can't select an empty string. So it's going to force me to select one of the valid options. I did... the other thing, we can talk about return options a little more. I'll probably handle that in a different, further along in the video. Right now, I'm just returning the options. I think we had a dictionary originally. This is just slightly different. I am going to save all here just to be sure everything is in my environment now. And then I'm going to pull CloudBolt back over. Let's refresh my blueprint. Again, these are still out of order, which I'm not a huge fan of, but we'll get there. So back to my environment. So notice it now says select a value, and it will prevent me from submitting the form until I think I have a couple of other things I need to fill out here. I think everything else has a value here. Let's see if the button changes to submit when I select something. So there you go. That was the field that was blocking me from submitting. Now, if I change, notice value be selected here. If I change to 2 and my options change, it's going to reset that so that I now need to reselect a value, and it's going to draw attention to my field by doing that. So again, using the tuple approach with an empty value prevents me from selecting it and helps to draw some attention to that field. All right, so now on to example 2, which was going through the returning multiple values and kind of adding those into a list. So back over to our documentation, I am going to just select I'm going to use the example here, just kind of a framework. So I'm going to copy that code. I'm going to create another field. We'll reorder all of these kind of together, but let's call this, what was the description? We'll call this multiple choice fields. And we're going to do a new file. Multiple choice. So the controlling field has multiple choices available. So this will be a second one. So we have now multiple choice control. So this is going to be a little bit different. So remember, we had the control value before. You can leave the control value in there for the multiple choice controlling field. The control values is a list of values that are passed in from that one single controlling field. So we're going to need to create a new parameter as a controlling field here. But let's go through and say, I think, let's do this. I like this example. This will be okay. So we'll have, effectively, we're starting an options dictionary. And then if we find trees in the control values list that was passed in, then we're going to add these options to our trees list, which we will then return at or our options list, which we will return at the bottom. If we find shrubs, we'll find that down here. So I'm just going to leave this as is. So let's save, jump back over to CloudBolt. I'm going to go back over to parameters. A second to load. We're going to create a field called plant types. And I think my namespace is GPO, so GPO underscore plant types. And then I'm going to make this a string. I'm going to make it required. Now here's the kicker. This is how we make it a list, is this allow multiple values button, which if I have multiple plant types defined, the user can select from those multiple plant types to generate the options in our dependent field. So I'm going to update that real quick. Just filter for my namespace. So plant types. I am going to give it some static options that we'll read. And I think it was trees, shrubs. Let's do grasses as well, just as a third type. This won't actually change any selections, but you'll see these as additional choices in the field. So these are the 3 available options that the user can select from. They can select one or more of those, and because it's required, they have to select at least one. Let's go back to all parameters. So we're going to create our let's see, what should we call that? These would be plant. I call that plant types. Let's call that maybe plant names. GPO, so name spacing. We're going to make this a string. We're going to make it required, and that's all that we're going to select. Actually, you know what? I am going to allow multiple values, because if we're selecting 2 controlling fields, we should be able to select multiple values from the field that's being controlled as well, right? So I'm going to leave that as is. we'll work through this. So we have plant names, we have plant types. Now plant names we need to first. This is very similar to the single controlling field because it is still a single controlling field. Let's see. It is required. We do need to add that programmatically generated options action. So I'm going to come back in here. I'm just going to point this at my file system. Fetch code from URLs. File. Reserve. Generate options. If I recall correctly. Generate options. Hey, I got it. We're going to refactor, just grab the name from this so I don't have to type it in. Okay, so we have our generated options plugin now. And once we've added, we can hit the back button in the browser to get back. Now, let's refresh to make, it should show here. Let's just be sure. There we go. So there's our generated options plugin. Now we need to set the dependency so that this knows which field is the controlling field. I'm just going to search for GPO, and plant types is going to be controlling field, and the dependency type is regenerate options. The last step, as always, is just to add these parameters to my environment. Without them on the environment, we're never going to be able to do anything with them. So let's look for the very last one, I believe. Search for GPO. We have plant types, plant names. And notice, I didn't point this out before. We have a C in that. I don't think I did. I recorded that yesterday. So we have now a C and a D, meaning that this is a controlling field and this is the dependent field, so that plant types, when we select something there, is going to generate the outputs for plant names. So let's add plant names and plant types here. Now that that's added on our environment, we can go over to custom server. Select my group. I can select my environment. Then we should see that that's now taking effect on the server itself. So here's plant types, plant names, again, out of order. We'll fix this here shortly. Notice there's no options in plant names right now. So I'm going to add in grasses. And what you'll notice now, nope, grasses was the one that wasn't applicable. So there's still no choices. That's what we should have seen. Now, if we do trees, notice there are multiple trees here. Again, I should probably do one that's kind of an empty selection. Trees and shrubs and grasses, maybe we select all three. You'll notice that I can now come in here and select multiple choices from the result of the data set that's being returned from the user selection here. So that's your choosing or adding elements to the list based off of a selection here. Now let's see if we remove shrubs. Is it going to remove the wild lilac? It should. There we go. Kind of resets that list, which is a good behavior. Just because we're changing values here, you probably want your list to reset to reflect. So yeah, even if we remove the one that we weren't concerned about. So it just maybe a little nuanced, but you could also, instead of having this be a multiple choice field, it could just be a single choice field, and then they would have to reselect every time the list regenerates. So there you go. That's use case number 2. Now let's go ahead and move on to use case number 3, which again is using multiple controlling fields. This is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to copy the code here. I'm going to go through, create another plugin. Fields, PY. Just going to paste this in here. Again, the big difference here, it still has the control value piped in. The big difference, though, is the control value dictionary entry that's being passed in here. There would be multiple fields that we would need to look for in here to determine what our options are going to end up being. So let's figure out what use case we want to do here. The more I think about this, I think I'm going to go with the out-of-the-box example, but I am going to put in some additional error handling. So with a control value dict that's being passed in, we can have additional checking to make sure that the values in the dictionary that we're expecting are there. So let's go ahead, if not monitoring tool or monitoring policy, let's return options. Actually, I like to do this even better. So my options right now are it's a list. It's just a list. So I'm going to turn this into a tuple. And I'm going to give it a key value pair. And the big reason for this is because I want to kind of do what we did a little bit earlier, where we had a blank value available here. I don't want this to auto select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say so we're going to have a monitoring tool, a monitoring policy, and then a severity. I am going to, because this is going to be, actually that should be fine. I need to change here. This is going to be, again, namespace, so global parameter or generated parameter options is what I was going with here. So in the control value dictionary, this is going to pass in the name of the parameter itself that we're using as control fields. So I need to get that from here. But it's okay to reference them as that here because that's what the variables are set to. So first object in the list, I want this to be an empty selection. So they have to select a severity manually. I also want to take and so if there isn't a control value dictionary, I'm going to return, I need to return a list, but it's going to be just these will be different but different prompts for the end user in the UI. So I'm going to space this down a little bit just to make it look pretty. So please select the monitoring tool and policy. Now I'm going to say, I'm going to split this up so that I can give custom errors for each of these. Please select a monitoring tool, and then please select a monitoring policy. That way, between the two fields, the end users are given kind of an intelligent way to determine which one hasn't been selected yet. And then what it'll do is it'll give you a label for monitoring tool and monitoring policy. And maybe there's some additional logic. This is just going to change the label right now. This is kind of a really very basic use case. The way that I would typically, or a specific use case I might use this for is if I'm building out a CloudBolt plugin to authenticate with one of our cloud providers. So maybe an AWS S3 bucket. I might first prompt the user to select an environment that corresponds to a resource handler inside of CloudBolt. And then I want them to select a region that resource should be deployed in. So I could get the environment to have my credentials from the resource handler, and then I can query the region in question through that second option to give a drop-down list of whatever I'm trying to return to the customer. So just a different way of handling that. And then you'll notice I don't need to define the options list here. Notice it's gray because it's being defined everywhere that I'm returning things. So I should be good. Let's save all. Let's go back over to CloudBolt. We're going to go back to all parameters. We're going to select monitoring tool, GPO. So this is going to be one of my controlling fields. I'm going to make it a string, going to make it required. Let's create. Okay, my second one. Monitoring policy, string, required. And then my third field is going to be monitoring severity. String, required. Okay, so I have my 3 monitoring fields now. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to open policy and tool and severity in a separate window. So monitoring policy, let's say gold, silver, bronze. Actually, bronze, silver, gold. I can add in monitoring tools. What are some good monitoring tools? Let's say Datadog. And Prometheus. So 2 options for this field. And then finally, we're going to go to our third field, create that generated parameter option, point at our plugin, and then set up the control. So monitoring severity. Add an action. Point this at my file. Let's go ahead and save. So we can see there's the script that we were working on. Now the kicker here is we've got to make sure we set up our dependency for that plugin to function. So I'm going to go to controlling field and I need GPO, so my namespace, that's not what I wanted. GPO, I need monitoring tool. That's going to be a regenerate options dependency. Now I'll create the first one, and what you'll notice here is that I can add additional ones. So I'm going to add, here's where my second dependency comes in. Then I need monitoring policy and regenerate options. I think I'm just going to edit this. Oh, relevant OS families doesn't really matter. Pretty sure monitoring tool was a regenerated options. Should be good to go. Just refresh. All right, so we're passing monitoring tool and monitoring policy are both the controlling fields for my monitoring severity parameter. Last thing we need to do is go back to the environment. Actually, I have it up already, so I'm just going to go there. I'm going to add in those 3 options. Policy severity tool. Once the environment's saved, I can then go back over to my blueprint, which we're already at, and just refresh. You should see 3 new fields here once we've selected our environment and our options. And it didn't like it. Invalid syntax on line 8. Didn't like part of what I did. So let's see. Oh, there you go. So that's why you pay attention to your IDE. It told me right where the error was. So let's fix that. We're going to save all. And we're going to go back and refresh. Perfect. It didn't die on us right away. So now we see severity, Datadog in bronze, or if we change this to gold in Prometheus, you'll see that these options are updated to reflect what was selected. So, yeah, so just those are the three methods for using generated parameter options. Again, one is kind of single, this one's single where it changes the different letters based on the number that was selected. You have then plant names where you can select one or more different types of plants. And then that changes the drop downs available there. And then finally, you have the monitoring severity that takes a combination of the policy and the tool to generate the options available in the drop down list here. So those are the three different ways to do generated parameter options with dependent fields. This concludes another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. And if you have any questions, if we can help with anything that you've seen here today, just to elaborate a little bit further, if you have any feedback for other ideas for the series, please reach out to your account executive. Thanks again and happy cloud bolting.